let's go ahead and just read this comment that pissed me off. It's from my boy J. Joe. I love you, J. Joe, but you stumbled upon something that I fucking hate. Okay, so after we talked about the Nepo babies, I referred to Julian Lennon, who I felt that everybody rooted for him, and Sean Lennon, who I felt was, overly hated on for the fact that he was the product of John and Yoko, and that's not his fault. That's nothing he could control. But so anyways, the comment is, everyone hated Sean Lennon because his mommy Yoko was a home wrecker and Cynthia stayed by John's side. Cynthia was John's first wife. Cynthia stayed by John's side even though he was a piece of shit wife beater. That crazy Yoko snapper gives him some epiphany to not beat women anymore, and history sweeps all his BS under the rug. John is remembered as a peaceful, loving hippie, but he was a liar and a fraud, and Sean gets hate as a result. Anytime that somebody brings up the Beatles, it does not matter what the fucking context is. If it is on the internet, it within maybe 10 comments, some fucking edgelord will eventually come out and say, well, John Lennon was a woman beater. And even though he, people act like he's so Mr. Perfect, he didn't take care of his one son and this and that, and just all this negative shit about John Lennon. And it only happens on the internet. I've never heard anyone bring up the John Lennon domestic violence shit or any of that in real life. It's always some dickhead on the internet. And sorry, J. Joe, not to call you a dickhead, but you know what I'm saying. In today's world, we're so into, I guess, tearing down old narratives. We love to go say, oh, you know what? You were a fan of Barney, huh? That was like your childhood, whatever. Well, how about the guy in the Barney suit was a crackhead and all this shit? Like, we want to fuck up everybody's childhood now. You know what? You loved Saved by the Bell, where they were all fucking pounding heroin and butt fucking each other. That's not true. I'm just saying of course you see them on YouTube. You see these fucking little 30-second bits on TikTok and all that bullshit where they want to take all the shit that was great to you as a child and tear it down and shit on it and let you know that just because you thought this was wholesome and this was some great part of your childhood, you know what? Behind the scenes, they were Nazis. They were, pounding meth and butt fucking children and all that shit. They need you to know that your youth wasn't as innocent as maybe you thought it was. And in the case of the Beatles, the public perception of the Beatles as a whole, considering that half the band is dead, the remaining half are like very nice elderly men who are just living out their days. So you look at them and the public perception of the Beatles, of course, peace, love, happy, sunny music and all that shit. And of course, you look at the Beatles' output in terms of their actual music, you can see where that comes from. At this point, Beatles music is used for children's cartoons and shit like that. It's some of the most wholesome shit that's out there. When you got, like a little kid who's just trying, getting into different types of music, you play them some Beatles, unlock some shit. That's what happened for me.
Oh, I know this song.
And so I don't know what it is, but anytime you have anyone that people tend to be positive about, somebody has to come tear that shit down. They can't fucking stand it. People accuse me of being a hater, but that's true fucking haterism. When you're such a miserable fuck that you can't stand people just like feeling good about something, of course, go listen to the Beatles. It's fucking happy, fun ass music, but it's not just that. There's some very deep shit. There's dark shit. And a lot of that gets lost because, the hit songs are all the happy shit. I want to hold your hand. Good Day Sunshine, all that good stuff. That's what people love. That's what people latch on to. But the Beatles were a very well-rounded band, and that's something that's been lost in the caricature that is put out there these days. The reality is John Lennon had a fucking hard life. I mean, if you look back at John Lennon's origins, if you look back into his early years, this motherfucker had a tough ass life. You could take John Lennon's origin and apply it to like a fucking gangster rapper and it would not seem out of place at all. John Lennon's dad ran out on him at some point, leaving him and his mom to fend for themselves. And this is way, way back in the day. And back then, to have a single mother, that was considered a great shame. And it was a taboo that fucked with you in your everyday life. Women that had to raise kids by themselves, it wasn't as commonplace as it is now. It was harder to get jobs. You were seen by society as a whore because you happened to get knocked up by somebody. So John had a tough life in that sense. And then when John was a teenager, his mom got hit by a cop that was just learning to drive. She died in the fucking streets. The constable was not charged. From there, he became incredibly angry, drank a lot, got into rock and roll music, became essentially a street ass motherfucker. I know it's a hard thing. It almost makes you want to laugh because you think of John Lennon, you certainly wouldn't think of him as a street ass motherfucker. He was used to having to fight. He was a guy with a lot of rage, and it manifested in a lot of different ways. And, he ends up in the Beatles. Of course, they've all got the matching clothes, the little cute whatever, and that's how we remember them. But don't forget, in their time, they were regarded as like fucking devil music, which is wild when you think about it. People said that the Beatles were pro-sex and pro, all this negative shit. They had, you look at those little mop tops, people would say, are they girls or guys? Like, that's how conservative and fucked up America was at the time. So John Lennon married Cynthia Powell in 1962. They had met in art school, essentially. And she admits that John was jealous by nature and that he was very possessive and that he would essentially torture her with anger and physical violence. John himself admits that it wasn't until his second wife, Yoko Ono, who essentially broke that marriage up. Supposedly Cynthia comes home one day, finds Yoko Ono wearing Cynthia's bathrobe all naked up under that motherfucker. Probably just fucked her man and is now wearing her clothes. So that's about as fucked up and brazen as it gets. But it was within that relationship with Yoko Ono that she challenged John to change himself and to find himself and shit like that. And John himself would come back and say that he was essentially immature. There was a Beatles song on Sgt. Pepper's called It's Getting Better All the Time. In that song, John Lennon says, I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved. Man, I was mean, but I'm changing my scene and I'm doing the best that I can. So when he was asked about that lyric by Playboy back in 1980, which was right around when he died, he said, I used to be cruel to my woman and physically any woman. I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself and I hit. I fought men and I hit women. That's why I am always on about peace. You see, it's the most violent people who go for love and peace. Everything's the opposite, but I sincerely believe in love and peace. I am a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence. I will have to be a lot older before I can face in public how I treated women as a youngster. Like, it's such judgy bullshit to simply write John Lennon off as a wife beater and all that shit, where I see a guy who, in a life that was shortened, did his best to evolve and did his best to be the best version of himself. Once these things are done, they can't be taken back. All you can do is try to get better. John admits he was a shitty father to his son, Julian. He references the way he treated women, the way he felt about women when he was younger. You even see it in early Beatles music. And the fucking opening lyric from John Lennon is, "I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man." That's some fucked up shit to say. If you put that stuff out right now, that's instant cancellation. Say, holy shit, what is this misogyny? And it's actually the fucking cute mop top Beatles. But that kind of makes a point, which is in those days. And I know sometimes it can be a bit of a cop out to say, well, back in those days. But once again, this is the late 50s, early 60s. And back then, domestic violence was not treated the same. You regularly saw it in film. In a lot of ways, it was seen like almost the same as like spanking your kids. So if the cops were to show up and you had slapped your wife around some, and you're like, oh, you know what, officer, it's fine. She just got a little mouthy with me and all that good shit. And the cops would leave. It was almost like your wife was your property. And that sort of chauvinism was common in society. So not saying it was okay, of course, it was bullshit. But at the same time, that's how it was. To be able to evolve with the times and learn from your mistakes and say, listen, I regret it. I've tried to be a better man, and I'll have to be a better man for many, many years to make up for this. John, of course, never got that opportunity. But, he was hated on for all that shit. Anytime you mention the bed loving peace bullshit, somebody will be like, yeah, from the Four Seasons. Well, he's John Lennon. He's fucking rich, dude. He can't pretend he's not fucking rich. He wasn't going to go around and pretend like he was living in the fucking streets like a real hippie. He just said, I support peace and love. I want to bring attention to this cause, and he absolutely did that.
I did an advertising campaign for peace. Can you understand that?
No, I can't.
A very big advertising campaign for peace.
Are you advertising
do
John Lennon or
do you
peace?
want nice middle-class gestures for peace
Maybe.
and intellectual
It's worked in
manifestos?
America.
The hippie movement would not have been as big if John Lennon didn't take up the fucking cause. A lot of hippies will tell you that they didn't want his help because it made it too much of like a fucking caricature. It made it too much of a style. It made it too much of whatever. But the bottom line is, if you want to bring about change and start a movement and move that movement forward, you need eyes, you need ears. And back in those days, we didn't have the fucking internet. It was just TV news. If you watch any interview with John Lennon, he was kind of an asshole. It's clear the guy was kind of a prick.
Well, I'm sorry you like your mop tops, dear, and you thought I was very satirical and witty, and you liked Hard Day's Night, love, but I've grown up, but you obviously haven't.
Have you?
Yes, folks.
What have you grown up to?
He didn't owe that to anybody. I understand everybody thought that the Beatles were cute and all that shit, but John Lennon is allowed to be who he is. But I respect anybody who can look at themselves and say, man, this is where I've fallen short. This is where I've fucked up. I'm going to make good on it. I'm going to do better. And by all accounts, he did. I understand you hate Yoko. You think John Lennon's a fraud, all that shit. John Lennon never hid shit. John Lennon was always 100% out on Front Street. The reason we all know about John Lennon as a woman beater and all that shit is because John Lennon told us. And he said, dude, it's my bad. I'm trying to do better. What is there to hate about that? What is there to fucking sit around and try to drag a motherfucker down decades after he's already dead and in the ground? I don't get it. I don't get why we want to dig up fucking ghosts and butt fuck them out in the streets. This is like a piss mist. Whenever people are having fun, there's inevitably somebody who wants to drop a piss mist and ruin everybody's good time. But it's the way of the world, I guess. Anyways, moving on.